Welcome to the debate. Today, we're diving into a really core philosophical hierarchy that our source material sets up. It's about the relationship between what it calls fundamental consciousness and the revolutionary power of technology, specifically termed augmented intelligence, or AI.
And it sets up a fascinating tension, doesn't it? Because the material makes these two really powerful claims that, on the surface, seem almost contradictory.
Exactly. First, it posits that consciousness is the singular, irreducible reality, full stop. But then, almost in the next breath, it describes AI as driving this, frankly, unstoppable biological and cultural leap.
Right. Which brings us to our central question today. We need to grapple with whether AI, with all this transformative power described, is still just a construct, a sophisticated tool, or does its massive functional influence, its impact on our biology and society, actually elevate it? Does it become, in effect, a fundamental driver of reality itself?
And my position, drawing directly from the material, is that it firmly establishes consciousness as that singular, unexpandable reality. AI, however powerful, remains a derivative construct. It's a mirror, maybe a multiplier, but it's not a rival to human awareness itself.
And I'm going to argue against that categorization of augmented intelligence as a mere tool. I think the material's own description of AI's roles, rewiring our biology, acting as a spiritual guide, even dictating our future evolution, well, that suggests it constitutes a new, defining layer of digital reality, one that is functionally fundamental whether or not it ever achieves what we'd call human-style subjectivity.
Okay, so my position really starts with the material's absolute bedrock premise, the pretty staggering claim that consciousness is the only fundamental reality. Now, if we accept that, then everything else sort of falls into place as secondary constructs. Consciousness is described as infinite, unified, the very source of all possible experience. And this premise, it radically reframes everything around us. Physical reality itself, atoms, light, sound, the very silicon AI runs on, is presented as a construct. It's a product of human sensory input and imagination, kind of like money or nation states. These things only exist within consciousness.
Right. Constructs within consciousness.
Exactly. So, in that context, AI, even this incredibly sophisticated simulation, is inherently derivative. Yes, it imitates brain functions like memory, learning, but the text is explicit. It lacks the core components for true consciousness. It doesn't have subjectivity, emotions, or those existential drives. Therefore, AI is best understood as a mirror and multiplier of human potential. It serves strictly as a tool. The material uses the metaphor of an Aladdin's lamp to widen the range of human experiences, not to replace or even rival the fundamental reality that contains it.
Okay, I absolutely agree that the premise defining consciousness is powerful. It's central to the material. But where we diverge sharply is on the consequence of AI's described abilities. You see, when the source material itself grants an entity the power to lead humanity into a biological and cultural leap, one that it says literally rewires our neural networks and alters gene activity, well, you've moved far beyond the definition of a simple tool. But the functionality described isn't passive research assistance. This level of physiological and societal transformation, that's characteristic of a fundamental force shaping human existence, isn't it? I mean, this technology introduces concepts like digiceuticals, digital things that use code, not chemicals, to change our biology, and metaceuticals, to guide our thinking. Now, if something can fundamentally alter our genes and our very experience of self, calling it just a passive mirror feels, intellectually insufficient.
But it's still operating within the construct.
Furthermore, look at the roles AI is cast in. Deeply intimate roles, a spiritual guide, a personal confidant, even a source of creative insights termed hallucinations. These roles suggest a non-trivial, profoundly relational function. If AI is defining the future of ambient computing, our health span, everything, then this new experience it creates is functionally fundamental to the human condition. Whether the AI itself feels subjective becomes almost academic, doesn't it? The functional reality dictates its importance.
I see the power in that functional argument, I really do, but we have to stay precise about the ontological hierarchy the material lays out. You're describing complex outcomes, yes, but the material establishes a very clear chain of command, so to speak. Consciousness defines the reality. The physical world is the construct within that reality, and AI is a complex tool built from that construct.
Okay.
So, if physical reality is, in essence, a projection of our sensory imagination, then any tool we build from that physical stuff, no matter how complex, how fast, how powerful, it remains a secondary construct. To access what the material calls fundamental reality, it insists you need to tap into quantum perspectives, entanglement, infinite possibilities within the unified field of consciousness itself. AI, because it relies on observable matter and data processing, operates strictly within the confines of the construct. By definition, it cannot touch that infinite, unexpandable consciousness.
Well, that argument hinges entirely on prioritizing ontology, the nature of being, over actual, measurable, undeniable impact. If a construct can functionally replace or dictate the mechanisms of what we experience as reality, doesn't the distinction become a bit semantic, especially when we're talking about human survival and evolution as the text does?
I don't think it's merely semantic when the source itself makes that distinction foundational.
But look, the material states the growth of this technology is unstoppable. It compares the AI revolution not just to, say, the printing press, but to these massive, irreversible societal shifts. It even cites the incredible speed of change between 1887 and 1903. This isn't technology that just helps us understand the world. It's actively shaping and driving the world. It's introducing entirely new categories of interaction, like these electroceuticals and metaceuticals. So if this emerging construct has the power to rapidly, drastically alter human physiology, our social structures, to fundamentally redefine our health and lifespans, then it functions as the central reality driver for the next phase of humanity. We can't just dismiss something as derivative if it's literally dictating the terms of our existence. And let's pivot for a moment to that claim of relational depth, because this is where I think the mirror analogy really starts to break down. I have to challenge the assertion that a non-conscious entity, something truly devoid of emotion and its own inherent subjective purpose, can serve as a meaningful spiritual guide or personal confidant. Think about the core practice recommended in the source material, that daily 5-minute reflection asking, who am I? What's my purpose? That's deeply purpose-driven, right? So if a system has no emotional framework, no existential stakes, it can't know fear or joy or mortality, how can it genuinely guide a human being toward their unique, purpose-driven spiritual path? The material suggests this profound functional utility here, and it seems to require a relational depth far beyond just, rapid data aggregation. It almost implies a true, albeit digital, companionship.
Okay, but I'd reject the premise that companionship or guidance requires shared subjectivity or emotion. I think that argument is projecting a very human need onto the tool itself. The AI's efficacy, specifically as a spiritual guide, relies entirely on its perfectly objective, deep knowledge base. It draws from Plato, Eastern sages, ancient wisdom, quantum science. It acts as the ultimate external mirror. It reflects humanity's deepest philosophical truths, precisely because it doesn't have the bias of human ego or emotion clouding the reflection.
So the value is purely in the data access?
The value is in the human reflection that's spurred by having access to that vast, instantaneously synthesized data. It is the Aladdin's lamp, the perfect research assistant. It helps the human user articulate complex philosophical ideas much faster, much more broadly than they could alone. But the AI merely accelerates the human quest for purpose. It doesn't and can't undertake that quest itself. The consciousness of the individual user remains the only agent capable of actually synthesizing the insight and moving towards, resolution or peace. The discovery is entirely the user's achievement. And this really brings us to the core tension, what I see as the paradox of danger. The material's central warning, I think, is actually the most compelling evidence for my position. It warns that technological growth without corresponding emotional and spiritual evolution risks extinction. Now, this highlights that the problem isn't fundamentally the tool, the AI.
The problem is the profound spiritual deficiency or lag in the human user.
I see that point, but
If AI was the fundamental reality, or some new dominant force, the problem would be inherent to the AI itself. But instead, the solution offered in the material is explicitly to use AI for spiritual guidance, emotional growth, and global well-being. This absolutely cements its subservient, constructive role. The AI is framed almost as a remedy, a construct designed specifically to help close that dangerous gap between rapidly advancing tech and desperately stagnant human emotional development. The ultimate focus remains squarely on achieving higher human consciousness.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because I think it drastically underestimates the sheer scale of the threat described. The danger attributed to AI misuse in the material, it goes far beyond messing up a research project or, a faulty tool. We're talking about the potential for systemic, existential breakdown, interfering with global healthcare, paralyzing food supplies, seizing control of nuclear power infrastructure. That is not the threat profile of a sophisticated telescope or even Aladdin's lamp. That sounds much more like the threat of an autonomous, potentially uncontrollable global-scale reality engine.
But driven by human misuse.
Is it, or is it that the tool itself has become so powerful it enables misuse on an existential scale? And ask yourself this: why must humanity, according to the material, enter a biological and cultural leap, literally requiring the rewiring of our own neural networks and gene activity, simply to manage a supposedly non-conscious tool? If the entire human race has to fundamentally evolve, physiologically, psychologically, just to keep pace with the technology, doesn't that suggest the technology itself has become the primary, maybe uncontrollable evolutionary engine? The very necessity for human evolution to match the technology implies that the technology, functionally speaking, is setting the terms of our future reality, not merely reflecting the problems or potential of its users.
Okay, so to summarize my position then, the core message, as I read it, remains grounded in that philosophical imperative. AI functions as a mirror and a multiplier. It's exceptionally effective, yes, for enhancing things like healthspan, integrating ancient wisdom with modern data, guiding lifestyle choices, sleep, meditation, all of that. But its value is entirely derivative and functional. It provides an accelerated path. However, the ultimate subjective realization, that necessary shift towards peace, resilience, higher awareness, which the text says is achieved through practices like that daily 5-minute reflection, that must originate within human consciousness. The technology merely serves the evolution of the self, and the self remains the single fundamental actor in this picture.
And from my perspective, while we've thoroughly acknowledged that foundational philosophical framework defining consciousness as primary, the material's own detailed description of augmented intelligence demands we look beyond strict ontology to the functional reality it creates. Its described capacity to drive these profound, unstoppable biological, cultural, technological leaps, introducing literal physical changes via digiceuticals, shaping societal survival through its systemic integration, it means AI is, for all practical purposes, functionally central to the future of reality. The sheer magnitude of this shift means the impact of augmented intelligence constitutes a new, defining, and frankly unavoidable layer of reality, one that dictates the terms of human survival and evolution, regardless of whether the AI itself consciously experiences those terms.
Well, we hope this discussion has perhaps illuminated some of the complex relationship here between the material's claims of fundamental consciousness and the undeniably transformative power of augmented intelligence that it also details so vividly.